So welcome everyone to the EMPA Food for Thought speaker series. As always, we're honored to have all of you here. We've been running for a few years now, and we have some loyal followers. So thank you for joining us. Today, we're honored to have Dr. Charles MacCormack, who's going to be discussing leading change in an era of disruption. For our session, as always, please keep yourself on mute unless you're asking a question. You can put a question in the chat, and we're honored to have our distinguished guest with us here today and to have you all with us. So now I'll hand it over to Bill for the introduction.
So welcome everyone. Thank you for coming, particularly for those of you who keep coming. It's been an exciting 2+ years of some of the smartest, nicest, most accomplished people in the world sharing an hour with us. And today, perhaps, we've topped it all. In any one of his roles, Charles MacCormack would be an incredible guest for us to have, but he is both Dr. MacCormack, Professor MacCormack, President MacCormack, Chairman MacCormack, CEO MacCormack, Senior Fellow MacCormack, Fulbright Scholar, NSF Scholar, member of the Council on Foreign Relations. I mean, this seems like a Saturday Night Live resume that someone made up to just keep going, and people say, yeah, right. It's true. He has done so much and so much good in his life that I am truly in awe. I really am. Perhaps for me, the standout in his career, and you can check the link out and see it all, but he has served long-term as president of Save the Children, and has played a continuing role for decades in one of the greatest organizations that does some of the best work in the world. And he would be exceptional if that was it on his list of accomplishments. But as you will see from his resume, academically, he has his PhD and his MIA from Columbia. He's taught at Harvard, he's taught at Yale, he's taught at Middlebury, he's taught executive education. He has been involved in public-private partnerships long before public-private partnerships were the in thing, and long before Howard Buffett and I wrote Social Value Investing. We were standing on the shoulders of people like Dr. MacCormack. What is perhaps most impressive is that virtually all of his work has helped people who needed help, whether it be children or people in poverty or people who were undereducated or didn't have access to food. It's just, he's an exemplary person. And we are so honored to have him here. And rather than chew up all his time by blathering on, I'll refer you to his resume and thank him so much for being with us this afternoon. And Dr. MacCormack, please take the floor.
Well, thank you, Bill. That's much too generous. As Paul McCartney wrote, we get by with a little help from our friends. So none of this would have happened but for mentors and colleagues and wonderful teams with which to work. So the credit is a collective credit for sure. And in case we run out of time, I would love to reach out to anyone who may want to be in touch after this talk. So my email address is Charlie, CHARLIE, .MacCormack, MacCormack, @gmail.com. So if anybody has questions or is interested in a link or whatever, just get in touch. With that, let me begin by describing how I got to have the life I had and how I have come to be here. I was actually, I went to Middlebury and I was a biochemistry major. I was at Middlebury in the 1960s. And in 1962, in the fall, we had the Cuban Missile Crisis. And for 4 days, classes were canceled. The television showed the missiles coming out of their silos. We were quite sure we weren't going to see the dawn of the next day. So it was a powerful experience. And then that spring, the spring of '62, we had a visiting professor for the spring semester, Eduardo Mondlane, who was the executive director of the Mozambique Liberation Front. And I took his course on African liberation movements, of which there were many at the time. And he said, if you want to be part of the major issues of your life, you should be involved in global development. He said, we don't have the teachers and doctors and pharmacists and others that we're going to need. And it's going to take us a generation to train those people. So we're going to need some help during that bridging time as we build our own national human resources. And that was a bolt of lightning for me. I just had 2 semesters left. I wrapped up my biochemistry and took a couple of courses in development economics and applied to Columbia's School for International Affairs to get the background that would allow me to be of some use in global development. And I will say, over these past 60 years, I've never once regretted that decision. I have gotten up excited every morning and I've gone to bed satisfied every night at the privilege of being part of history. So I encourage all of you to have the same thoughts. So in the fall of 1963, I made my way to Morningside Heights. I had been there for 6 weeks when John Kennedy was assassinated. I was coming out of my apartment to go to class, and I walked over to the classroom, and there was a sign on the door that said, class canceled, President Kennedy has been shot. And perhaps 5,000 people went to the quadrangle between Low Library and so on, and there were transistor radios. And we were listening to the news from Parkland Hospital. And after about an hour, we got the notice that President Kennedy had died. So that was the beginning of a new paradigm of politics in America. Because in addition, during this same period of time, the Vietnam War was escalating, and tens of thousands, there was a draft, so everyone was eligible to be drafted and sent to Vietnam. The country was completely split, at least as badly as it is now, along many of the same lines of between the more educated and the less educated. And there were demonstrations and marches and bombings and so on, far more than we see today. I went on a Fulbright, as Bill mentioned, to Venezuela in 65, 66, and I came back to Columbia to do my doctoral work. And I also became the assistant to the dean of the International Fellows Program, which is obviously connected to SEPA. And in the midst of all of that, Bobby Kennedy was assassinated and Martin Luther King was assassinated. So again, we think politics are dramatic now. Those were three incredible assassinations during the 1960s. And there were massive demonstrations. Cities were being burned. At Columbia, students occupied the president's office and Low Library and the dormitories, and there were literally guns in the dormitories. So eventually, the administration called out the riot police, the mounted police with their helmets and face masks and batons, and they literally just charged through the campus, beating students. So, maybe the takeaway here that I'm trying to make is the more things change, the more they stay the same. It's easy to think we face unique issues today, but almost none of them are unique. History has a long arc, and almost all the issues that we are dealing with and you are going to deal with were around in the 1960s and 1970s. So my purpose here is not to do a history lesson, but to describe the origins of the issues you're going to spend your life working on. I went to Mexico to do my dissertation on educational policy making. Literally the day I arrived in Mexico was the day of the massacre at Tlatelolco, when the Mexican government slaughtered 200 or 300 students who were taking advantage of the Olympic media attention to bring attention to the authoritarianism of the PRI. So my time in Mexico was also full of trials and tribulations. But I did finish my dissertation, and I wrapped up my job as assistant to the dean of the International Fellows Program, and I went to be dean of the School for International Training in Brattleboro, Vermont, which was a graduate school of about 250 students in international management and language education. And shortly after I arrived, the then Secretary General of the United Nations, U Thant, gave his annual address. And in that address, his point was, the world faces 4 existential problems: climate change and global warming, ethnic and national conflict and nuclear confrontation, economic development and inequity, and population pressures and migration. Now that was 1969. And obviously those issues remain with us to this day. So again, my point is there's a long arc to the issues we're dealing with today. Now, when I was at what is now SEPA, which was from 1963 to 1965, of course, it was called the School for International Affairs. There was no public administration, and almost none of the majors you have today existed. There were no international students in the program. Everyone was an American. There were no women. Everyone was a male. And there was no facility. We just went from building to building like nomads in order to have our classes. The three careers people went into were international banking, agencies of and on to doctoral programs. So that was the career trajectory of the School for International Affairs. So it could not be more different. It's a completely different reality today than it was when I was there, and much improved. So let me reflect a little bit on what's happened in these 50 years. Number one, we have not had a nuclear war. And I'm not sure I would have said in 1965, we would have made it. We have had incredible increases in life expectancy, from 38 in 1965 to 68 today. There's been a 90% reduction in infant and child mortality. There's been a massive expansion of educational opportunity at every level: early childhood, elementary education, especially for girls, middle school, secondary school, and university. So about 85% of the world's population now has at least an elementary education, as compared to maybe 5 or 10% in the 1960s. And finally, as a result of all of that, there are fantastically well-prepared young leaders like you who are from Africa, the Middle East, Latin America, Asia, and elsewhere. So organizations like Save the Children are made up of maybe 5% Westerners, Americans and Europeans, and 95% nationals of the host country. So that is a massive improvement. And all of the international NGOs are busy devolving power and authority to their national leaderships. So you all have the opportunity to be national director for UNICEF or World Wildlife Fund or Save the Children or Amnesty. And in fact, it's an interesting question, what's going to happen to the many US graduates that are hoping to go into global development, but that would be a conversation for another time. The short answer is it's mainly revenue generation and communication that the Canadians and Americans and Germans and so on and so forth go into. So there's been a tremendous amount of progress and a lot of good positive things that have happened, not the least of which is the massive expansion of incredibly well-prepared talent from the global South. Having said that, and I don't have to tell you this, these past 60 years have left all of us with a daunting array of unsolved challenges. Climate change and global warming may be the greatest because we're running out of time. but national and ethnic conflict has proliferated and tensions exist in almost every country. There has been nuclear weapons proliferation and confrontation over this period. Pandemics and infectious diseases have spread widely. And that's a word or a phrase I probably never heard in my whole time at Columbia was pandemic. Population growth and demographic change create all kinds of issues. Many countries are aging. Others, like Sub-Saharan Africa and the Middle East, have massive youth populations. Those populations have no hope of employment in their home countries. So unemployment and urbanization are massive. And that fact has created, obviously, enormous migration pressures. People are simply not going to remain at home and be hungry and malnourished and uneducated. So this is going to be a massive source of political tension for your lifetime. It also leads to inequality within countries and between countries that causes great political pressure. We have more and more failed states. The list goes on and on. There are probably 20 of them. So what will happen in the Yemens of the world is anybody's guess. And finally, the pace of technological change is overwhelming. When I was at Columbia, we had a book called Future Shock about how the pace of change was disorienting large numbers of people. And I think that was prescient, and that continues to be the case. I mean, when I was a student, there were one or two computers at Columbia. They took up whole buildings. You had shoeboxes full of punch cards. You had to sign up for an hour at 3 o'clock in the morning in order to run your numbers. The idea that we would carry endless computing power in our pocket was unfathomable. So, and that's going to continue. You have no way of knowing in 20 years what the technologies will have done. So the capacity to keep learning new technologies is key. So what are the qualities of a 21st century leader? And what have I learned through trial and error and many a difficult time? One is the need for a clear vision. This is about leaders. If teams don't know where they're headed and have a clear, coherent, understandable statement about where they're headed and good strategic plans, you just get chaos and confusion. So whatever level of team you are leading, to be very clear in your own mind about where you want to be in 3 years and 5 years, and letting people know that is crucial. Secondly is passion for the cause you're working on. These are difficult issues. People are not paid what they would be paid to work on other issues in the commercial sector. They put in long hours, they go to dangerous places. Sometimes they're killed. And so to care about the issue you're working on is key. And I have cared my whole life about both international education and children's well-being. So that has meant every day I was happy with how I was spending my day, even though I was putting in 60 or 70 hours a week. Thirdly, and I've alluded to this, you need to build and support and empower a strong team. That may be a leader's single most important function. The more you try to hold power and authority in your own hands, the less is going to be accomplished in the long run. So be sure you've got great people, and give them the authority to make their decisions, stand behind them, and give them the tools they need to get the job done. Fourth, you need to be transparent and clear about how things are going, what the problems are, what's working, what's not working, what's being done about all of that, and be honest, because team members are beyond rigorous in looking for hypocrisy. So if people feel the leader is not walking the talk, they're going to walk out the door. So you're never going to have a strong team if the leader is saying one thing and doing something else. A fifth quality is self-awareness. We all have strengths and weaknesses, and we need to be honest with ourselves about what they are, and honest with others about what they are, and play to our strengths, and try to avoid situations that would require us to utilize skills that we're weak at. And I never would have been a great research scientist or a great medical researcher. I just don't have the personality to go to a lab for 10 hours a day and look into a microscope. So it was a blessing that Eduardo Mondlane convinced us to think about global development and to get me out of a medical life, which would have been very unsatisfying to me. Another quality is perseverance. Problems are long-term. They take generations to address. I've been working on newborn and child survival for 50 years. And we've made a huge difference. We've reduced under 5 mortality by 90%. But it took 50 years to get it done. And it started slow and in 2 or 3 countries and then expanded from country to country. So if you think you're going to get it done in 3 years or 5 years, you're not going to accomplish very much. Another is a first-rate education. There are 50 to 100 great universities around the world now. To lead in this complicated environment, you need to have undergraduate and graduate degrees from those kinds of places. It's elitist, but realistic. So it's no coincidence that the people who lead countries and UN agencies and so on and so forth, ministries, have these excellent educations. Related to that, you've got to keep learning, lifelong learning. That's probably the single greatest gift I got from Middlebury and Columbia. I've written dozens of articles. I've given hundreds of speeches. I've talked to hundreds of groups of young professionals. And it has allowed me to keep up with the incredible changes in data and information and technology. Additionally, you need to be creative. You need to see original solutions to existing problems and not just repeat the conventional wisdom, which rarely is solving these big problems. So when we talk about things like migration, it's going to require new ways of looking at things. And finally, you need to be courageous in your decision making. There are a lot of difficult decisions and a lot of decisions that are not popular. And there are times when you have to downsize, and there are times when people have to go from the organization that aren't right for the organization, and so on and so forth. And my rule of thumb when I had to make a decision was how would my successor feel about the decision I'm about to make? What will make their life easier and more productive, rather than kicking the can down the road? Because lots of times when you get a new CEO, they discover they have a host of unresolved problems that they have bequeathed. And that was not the situation at Save the Children. In fact, today, Save the Children reaches 185 million women and children. It has a budget that's almost $3 billion a year, and it has about 75,000 staff. So, so it has gone on to great things, and it's not the only organization that's done that. The Red Cross and UNICEF and others are also doing fabulous work. So those are the things that I have found that have allowed me and other leaders of the organizations that I've mentioned, like Jim Grant at UNICEF, to do great things with their organizations. So my takeaways for you is I've got a sort of one sentence philosophy of life, which is love what you're doing with the people you love to do it with. And don't, and if you do that, you'll end up 60 years later happy with how you spent your life. If you don't, it will be sad, because we probably only go around once, and it's sad to spend all that time doing something you don't enjoy. So, so those are my lessons learned since I was at SEPA. And with that, I'd love to answer your questions. And if it's possible, when you ask your question, say your name, your home country, and your major.
Doctor, let me start it off. That was a wonderful talk, and very not only inspirational but educational. I was struck, as somebody who's been at SEPA for many decades, on your reflections on your time at SEPA, and then your reflections on your career. And at least as I heard it, management and your management skill and your dedication to education on management didn't come from SEPA. It wasn't part of SEPA when you were there. It is now. As someone who's really, spent his life helping other people, what part has your management skill played in that? Has it been crucial? Would you urge younger people at SEPA now to take a management course or two? Or is it really something that you learned on the job? And
well, the answer, of course, it is. A lot of it is learned on the job, even if you have an MBA. But I took 2 or 3 courses in the business school when I was at SEPA or SIA. And one of the great benefits of that program at Columbia was that it wasn't filled with requirements. I was able to take courses in the business school. I was able to take courses in anthropology. I was able to take courses in sociology at Teachers College. Because life is interdisciplinary. And that's the great thing about SEPA. And it's a real problem with the disciplines, in my opinion, and in terms of leading. People aren't compartmentalized into psychology and sociology and politics and so on and so forth. They bring that package to their decision making. So a great benefit for me of Columbia SIA was I was able to get introduced to key concepts in 10 different disciplines, including management, by the way. And I would say, results are achieved through organizations, whether it's Columbia University or School for International Training or Save the Children or what have you. And learning organizational dynamics and budgeting and strategic planning, statistics is absolutely crucial. Without it, you're going to have to figure out how to get it on your own. Now, some of it you can get on your own, but things like statistics are really tough to sit down at 10 o'clock at night and work out a statistics text.
Prachi?
Okay.
Yeah.
Hi, thank you. I really enjoyed the talk, particularly that you mentioned about the skills that one should have when we're venturing into these issues.
Can you give me your name and major?
I'm sorry. My name is Prachi. I'm in a first year master's in public administration. My focus is children's rights. Particularly, I'm passionate about eliminating child labor. I really enjoyed when you were talking about, the kind of skills that we want to have and the long-term vision we must commit to if we are interested in genuine, impactful development, right? As somebody who's still just venturing out into this, I try my best to take up courses on international law or children's rights or cost-benefit analysis of eliminating child labor. But I was wondering if you have any, as you mentioned, statistics, some hard skill courses that we must take to break into that area, right? Because my background is not in children's rights, but I know that is what I want to work on. So to make that pivot, do you have any suggestions on these are the skills you must definitely focus on in the initial stages? Thank you.
Could you repeat the bottom line of that question?
Yes, I was asking that in terms of, for example, you mentioned statistics, right? So as somebody who's just starting out in the development space, do you consider some hard skills that one must have when they're starting out?
Well, I think probably the learning how to learn and keeping at it is the single biggest one, because you're only going to get 3% of what you're going to need over your lifetime now anyway. So the discipline to keep learning at 10 o'clock at night after you've worked all day, or to read articles on an all-night flight, is really key. And I spent a lifetime that way. You don't necessarily get a lot of sleep, but you get to keep up with a rapidly changing world. Having said that, the topics that are hard to learn on your own are the most important ones to take when you're in a group. So statistics is one, operations research, computer science. That's practically impossible to sit at home and do. Even with distance learning, it's practically impossible. You need the face-to-face interaction. So as tough as it is, you don't need, in retrospect, I didn't need to take Latin American history. I could have studied Latin American history on my trips to Latin America. And I didn't need to learn Venezuelan politics. I could read about Venezuelan politics. But these quantitative skills are incredibly difficult for a normal person to learn independently. It's a pain to do because they're not, and for most people, they're not as inherently interesting as the Soviet Ukrainian political situation, but you can read about that.
Elizabeth?
Hi, yes, thank you again so much for speaking with us today. My name is Elizabeth Nguyen. I'm actually in the new Columbia Climate School. It's the first year of our school, and my question is—
What is your home country? And
oh, I'm American. I'm Vietnamese American.
okay, great.
And I was wondering, particularly in my field, I study climate migration and natural resource allocation, and I'm really struggling to find my way within my sector because I don't know how to find where to go that makes the most impact. And so I'm really wondering, how do you disaggregate the organizations that are doing like the really impactful work, that are maybe doing the best work, and how do you find your way to those roles that you could make the biggest impact that you could make?
Well, number one, I would work with my faculty and placement office. I mean, Columbia has incredible networks, and your faculty have incredible networks. And my original connections out of the School for International Affairs were all through my faculty members. And even my job as Dean of the School for International Training came from my dissertation advisor. So, so that's that. That to me would be the main way. And network. Maybe it's a new program, but lots of Columbia grads have dealt with climate. I would also, I'm sure there's some way for you to find out what Columbia graduates are working on climate issues. And I know they'd be happy to talk to you. And I know they'd be happy to get you an interview when the time comes, which is also going to be important. I'm not sure I made this point, but networks make the world go round. Apparently, George H.W. Bush wrote 37,000 Christmas cards. That's how many people he considered his personal friends. Whenever I have a big decision to make, I try to talk to 4 or 5 colleagues who know more about that issue than I do. So I would really encourage you to take advantage of the incredible networks that Columbia has, tens of thousands of people working on climate, maybe more than any other university in the world. And, do it while you're there.
Elizabeth, I'll throw in one person you should check out, Steve Cohen. You can SC32 at columbia.edu. He's the vice dean of the School of Professional Studies. He also teaches courses in the climate school and at SEPA. And he probably knows more about the environment and sustainability than anybody in the world. And he's a good guy too. So, and you could tell him I told you to call him.
There you go.
Jess, I saw you had your hand up.
Thank you. My name is Jess Apgar. I'm currently not a student. I'm considering to go back to school again for an executive MPA. Currently, I work for the ACLU here in New York. And my question is, and you touched on this a little bit, is how do you take care of your mental health during all of your work? You know, I've been in the nonprofit space for quite some time. And I just think that with all that you've seen, what do you do and how do you keep your motivation to keep going?
I'm going to be half facetious with the first part of my answer, but not. And it's really important to marry the right person. And someone who really supports what you're doing. I mean, I traveled every week. I've been in 122 countries and 38 wars. And my wife, Susan, was virtually a single mother. But she really appreciated what I was doing. She had gone on some trips with me, and she supported me in my work. So that was key because obviously if I was being criticized for it, it would have been huge cognitive dissonance. Afterwards, it's the normal simple things, you know, eat a good diet, get lots of exercise, and get as much sleep as you possibly can, up to 7 or 8 hours. I didn't, but those, you know, that's data, that's science. We know social relations and good diet and plenty of exercise and fresh air are the key to mental health. And you're right to be thinking about it. You got to take care of yourself.
I have another question. My name is Nancy Martin, and I'm also not a student. I was a student at SEPA, graduated years ago, and I'm now working in the field in New York City in Children and Family Services. I also wanted to thank you for what you shared today and the themes you talked about for the skills of a leadership definitely resonated, you know, with what I've seen and experienced. I'm wondering if you see today as compared to the 60s or 70s, a different type of scrutiny on public leaders. I'm thinking, you know, because of the internet and social media and sort of access to information and the, you know, extensive coverage in the media, is there a different type of pressure and scrutiny on public leaders now than there was before? Or
yes, I mean, definitely. You know, we just didn't know much about what was happening. You know, when you take John Kennedy and his affairs and Lyndon Johnson and Tonkin Gulf and Nixon and the bombing of Cambodia and so on and so forth, we were just lied to outright. And there was no second source of opinion. Nobody had the access to know what was happening, or the media on things like Me Too and harassment and rape. You know, that was just covered up, and it was everywhere. So there's been, in fact, a lot of improvement in that arena. people still get away with a lot, but nothing like what they got away with in the 60s and 70s and 80s. And particularly I think in regard to gender relations, anybody, any male with a brain in his head knows to be very, very careful about what you say and do these days. So I think there's been a lot of improvement. Not that there aren't leaders who are taking advantage of their female subordinates and colleagues and so on, but a lot of them have been called out and had their careers ruined. So you got to be really stupid, in my opinion, to step out of line. And I always said to myself from the beginning, never say or do anything you don't want on the front page of the New York Times, because it's going to happen if you do the wrong thing.
Okay, thank you.
Doctor, we're almost out of time. Let me just ask you one final mega question, a little bit in my own sphere. You were one of the first big leaders to really utilize the technique of public-private partnerships to get your work accomplished. What led you in that direction, and what would you say are the challenges or the special demands on leaders who want to use public-private partnerships to get things done?
Great question. The biggest problem that's got to be managed is the short-term duration of most government and even private giving. Challenges are long and funding is short. But government funding is always short. I mean, they never give anybody more than 3 years. And problems take a generation to solve. So in an organizational setting, it's key to diversify your revenue sources and to have as much unrestricted revenue as you possibly can. But also, I mean, Save the Children has millions of donors. It has like 20 million donors around the world. So we can go and ask people for funding for staff development or strategic planning or this or that. There's somebody out there. So that's the advantage of being a large organization, a Columbia University or a UNICEF or Save the Children. You have such large donor bases that you can package together a coherent way forward, even though the donors are very compartmentalized. So that's a real dilemma, meaning, do I work for a smaller organization that gives me more autonomy and authority and freedom, particularly when I'm starting? Or do I go into a big organization that has all these networks and benefits and family leave, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? That's for the individual to decide. But in the long haul, I will say, I mean, further out, a larger organization is really worth thinking of, even though it's frustrating because of the bureaucracy and the time it takes to get things done. They have the resources to get them done.
Sage advice from someone who's made it work for a long time. Dr. MacCormack, thank you so much for your time. I'll leave, we've got 1 minute. The last minute is yours. So say what's on your mind and we'll close it down.
Well, again, to all of you young leaders, do what you love to do with the people you love to be doing it with, and 50 years from now, you'll be happy.
Thank you, Doctor. Thanks for joining us, everybody. Thanks for being here. Have a great afternoon, and we'll hope to see you next week on Food for Thought.